y'all, my name is Cassie and I am the creator of Pieces of Scrap, and in today's video we're going to be doing another free pattern review video. This video, the theme will be food themed amigurumi characters, so that can range from animals that are food themed to just food amigurumi. For the basis of this video, I chose mostly just like amigurumi that represented food or beverages. So with all that being said, I'm going to talk about the rating criteria I use to rate these patterns. Number one is, would I use the pattern again? This really comes down to how easy it is to understand, how quickly I can get through the pattern, if it's really market preppable, because for me, at least, I mostly create amigurumi plushies for market prepping and selling them in person markets as well as like in stores. So market preppability, those patterns being really quick and easy, is really important to me. Number two is, can I understand the pattern easily? And this really comes down to if it's easy for a beginner crocheter through advanced crocheter to understand what's going on in the pattern. This comes down to if the instructions are thorough and detailed, as well as if there are outlined diagrams or work in progress photos that show you each step of the way, especially steps that can be a little bit more complicated than others, what you're supposed to be doing in the pattern. And finally, number three is, do I like the finished product? And this really comes down to whether it's a case of expectations versus reality, where the pattern designer might present a photo of the final product that looks entirely different from what you get when you finish it. The first pattern I reviewed for this video is the Gummy Bear. This is a pattern by Millie's Crochet House. And as you can see here, I've made it in 3 different colors and 3 different yarn types, ranging from hook sizes, I believe 6 to 4 millimeters. So this middle one would be 5 millimeters. So 6, 5, 4. And the different yarn types that I've got here, this is Burr Ya Chenille. This is a yarn that you're probably not familiar with. It's because I got it off of Amazon. And then the middle one here is Big Twist yarn. And then the smallest one here is Premier Retro Velvet yarn. So we've got 3 different yarn types to show the kind of size differences you get when you work it up in different yarn sizes and hook sizes. This pattern took me 12 minutes to work up. There's not anything really complicated involved in the pattern, the most complicated thing being a bobble stitch, and then this middle thing is just like a bobble stitch worked into 2 stitches, so that one's a little bit more complicated, but overall, no sewing involved, no sew project. I always love a no sew project if you know me. And it's just really quick and easy to work up. The first thing that I noticed about the pattern was just that the magic ring of 6 single crochets isn't noted as its own round. It's noted as before the rounds even start. So normally in a amigurumi pattern, you would have round 1 as your magic ring. But in this pattern, round 1 starts into the next round following the magic ring, which is a little weird. That's not a huge deal. It's really up to the pattern designer to just establish kind of a consistent way that they write patterns, and if that's the way they write patterns, that's not really a big deal. For me, it was just a little bit confusing because like the industry standard is to include that first round of a magic ring as your first round, so it just got me a little lost for a second because I was counting my rows and using my row counter, that little blue thing that you guys see sometimes in my time lapses, and just by second nature I had marked the magic ring as our first round without even noticing in the pattern. And then once I got to round 3, it was a little confusing because I was looking at my row counter and looking between my row counter and the pattern and noticing that my row counter was off, and I was like, what happened? And then I noticed that the magic ring is not counted as a round. The next thing that I noticed was in round 4, it's not really clear how many loops you're supposed to be pulling through when it says pull through. The only way you can have 9 loops on your hook at the end of this sequence is if you only pull through 1 loop on your hook when it says to pull through. This was a little confusing and frustrating for me because once I realized that I didn't know how many loops I was supposed to pull through, I had to rework the stitch that it was asking me to work because I didn't have enough loops at the end of the whole sequence. You're supposed to have 9 loops, like I was saying, and I believe I only had 4 the way that I was pulling through. So that was a big discrepancy. Overall, I don't think it should make a huge difference. You're really just creating a bobble stitch for the muzzle portion of the gummy bear's head, and having the right amount of loops on the hook shouldn't really matter for that. It's just you're making half of a bobble stitch in one stitch, and then you go to the next stitch and you make the other half of the bobble stitch, and then you pull through the entire bobble stitch to make one stitch. So maybe rephrasing that part of the pattern would make it a little bit easier to understand, or even having a photo in that area showing you exactly what you should be doing could be easier to understand as well. Big thing here is that there were photos for this step, it's just on the next page. And for me as a crocheter and working through a lot of amigurumi patterns, when I notice a bunch of instructions on one page, I expect that everything to be there and not expect that there might be more photos for that step on the next page of the pattern. I'm just expecting to see everything in one place. And so the fact that the work in progress photos were on the next page kind of threw me off a little. So I had already like solved the issue that I was trying to figure out, that confusion that I had about how many loops to pull through. So it's just a little frustrating that those photos were there and I just didn't notice them until I was ready to go on to the next step and already figured out what was going wrong. So having all of those photos and the instructions in the same place, I think, is super important. In addition to those photos being on the next page, I think it would have been really helpful to have some sort of correspondence about what step of that round 4 the photo corresponds to. So having a number or a little letter or some sort of color code to show you what part of the step corresponded to which photo. And in addition, also just having those photos on the same page would have been really helpful. The next note that I have is that the instruction to add eyes doesn't tell you how many stitches should be in between them or where to place them in between rounds 3 and 4. There is a picture which makes it a little bit more obvious about where they should go, but I think it should still say where they are placed in the instructions for clarity. Overall, this pattern is really cute. Once you get through it the first time and understand what you're supposed to be doing, you're not going to have issues the next few times that you make it, because you probably will be making this a lot because they're super market prep friendly, and who doesn't want a cute little gummy bear? I've seen these really popular in the past at markets, and I understand why now. Like, they're super quick and easy. You don't have to worry about color changes or anything like that. So I really like the pattern. It could be refined to be a lot clearer and more user-friendly than it currently is, and that is why I'm going to rate the pattern 4 stars out of 5. The next pattern I reviewed for this video is a bigger pattern, so let me carefully lift these up for you. This is the Chubby Onion pattern by Crochet by Janina, and as you see here, I have also made it in 3 different yarn sizes and hook sizes, and for consistency throughout the entire video, I have done that for each pattern, so you have that to look forward to. So we have different color combinations, different yarn sizes, and you can see how big they come out. So the smallest one here was made with velvet yarn. This is Premier Retro Velvet with a 4mm hook. The middle size is Big Twist, and I used a 5mm hook. And this one, the biggest one, is with Yeah yarn, and I used a 6mm hook. So quite a bit of a size difference here, especially if you put the smallest one next to the biggest one. And the smallest one is probably my favorite out of the 3, just because how precious and small it is. And this is like probably about the size of an extra large onion that you might be picking up from the grocery store in real life as well. So we've got all these cute little onions. I put 2 of our little onion friends in the background so that I can really focus on not juggling multiple onions as I talk to you about this pattern. So I've just got the biggest one here. I wanted to address that this part at the bottom is supposed to be like stringy, like little roots that you would have on the onion if you were to pull it out of the ground. It's a little bit confusing about what that is supposed to be, but that is definitely what it's supposed to be from somebody who actually grows their own onions. But anyway, this pattern takes you 35 minutes to work up, which is really encouraging seeing the size that it is. You'd think that it might take longer, but 35 minutes is a really decent time for a project this size, at least in this yarn size. My only real note about the pattern is super minor, and it's just that every instance of the word first in the pattern is misspelled. It's missing the S in there, so it just says fert. It is possible that the pattern designer isn't a native English speaker, which might be why that is consistently misspelled in the pattern, but a lot of pattern designing websites do have spell checks, so that was just a little bit weird for me to see consistently misspelled throughout. Overall, I really loved this pattern. It's really beautifully written, lots of detailed instructions, as well as like little annotations on the pattern that point you to different photos and different steps that you should be doing that can kind of elaborate on where things are supposed to go, what you're supposed to be doing, what it should look like, those sort of things. All of which was really helpful when making this pattern, and it was just also really easy to follow with all of the work in progress photos, and like I said, all of the little extra annotations pointing you in the right direction were also really helpful, especially in places where you might be a little bit confused about what the steps are supposed to look like. So all of that being said, I am going to rate this pattern 5 stars out of 5. The next pattern I reviewed for this video is a chicken nugget pattern. This is the Nugget by Crochet with Luna. And as you can see here, we've got 3 different yarn types again, same hook sizes. This one is made in Burya, this one is made in Premier Parfait Chunky, and this one is made in Bernat Velvet. And I love the different colors you can use to get different textures. Like this one looks like it might have come out of the fryer and it's still glistening with oil, where this one is like the perfect golden color of a fried nugget, and then this one is just a little bit more burnt and maybe has been sitting out a little longer. So we've got some cute little chicken nuggets here, and they could even add some blush to them to make them even like a little bit more cutesy as well. This pattern works up super quickly as well. It's a great market prepping find if you're looking for some more market prepping patterns, food patterns specifically. These work up in 12 minutes and they're super quick and easy. My first note about the pattern is that there's not a note in round 1 that tells you to work around the chain, which isn't something that a lot of crocheters familiar with amigurumi are expecting. A lot of people work with a magic ring or a chain 2 and work into the first stitch kind of situation. So working around a chain isn't super beginner friendly, and I think there just needs to be a little bit more instruction in that part of the pattern. There's also not work in progress photos or a diagram to illustrate that part of the pattern either. So it's not very beginner friendly on that part. I also really think that work in progress photos are needed elsewhere in the pattern as well, especially in areas where we're starting to increase on one side of the nugget or when we're embroidering the smile. Overall, it just would have been nice to have a photo of what it looks like, especially in the part where it says to fold the bottom in half and sew it closed. I think that the fold in half instruction is really vague. What I think is actually meant there is to pinch the opening closed and then sew it closed. And I think pulling it tight when you've sewn it closed as well makes that last round a little bit rounder at the bottom and not as boxy. Finally, I also thought that the instruction to fasten off and slip stitch at the end of the pattern is written in the wrong order. You can't really slip stitch after you fasten off, but I mean, you can, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense to do it in that order, because after you slip stitch, you're going to have to fasten off again. Overall, it's a really cute and simple pattern. I just think that in a couple areas, it isn't as beginner friendly as typical patterns like this are. And so having additional work in progress photos or just like a little bit more instruction in those areas, a little bit more detail, would make this pattern a lot more beginner friendly and not just accessible for intermediate to advanced amigurumi crocheters. So with all that being said, I would rate this pattern 3.5 stars out of 5. The next pattern I reviewed for this video is the Baby Carrot pattern by Crochet with Bay. And I have these in some different yarns than we're used to seeing in this video today. So this one, the biggest one here, 6mm hook with Premier Gumdrop. And what I like to do with the Premier gumdrop skeins is to cut apart the color transitions because I just really like the texture, and there isn't a lot of use cases for using a cake of yarn that has like color transitions kind of sporadically within it. So you get huge sections of colors within these cakes, and I just like to cut them apart for solid color things like this, so I don't have to worry about running out of a single color when I'm working on something like this. Next up, we have Premier Parfait Chunky with a 5mm hook, and then finally we have Moja Dream in the marshmallow color, as well as the green up here is a big twist in Posh. So got 3 different sizes here, and these are really perfect keychain size, especially if you're working with Premier or Moja Dream, either a 5mm hook or a 4mm hook. That's really great keychain size, especially the smaller one. We have yet another pattern that is pretty market prep friendly, with that being said, as well as just working up really quickly. And for some reason I was hitting the 12-minute mark a lot on these patterns, so this is another pattern that was 12 minutes to make for me. So my first note is that I wish the stem instructions were a little bit more detailed. They were super detailed already, but I kind of wish that there was a photo of just the top of the carrot with like little X's or some other kind of annotation on the photo itself to mark which stitches to crochet into, and then maybe you could like color code those annotations to match the steps in the stem steps so that you know which stitch is which part of the steps, and that would make it a little bit easier for visual learners, I think. But that was my only note. I think this pattern is really awesome, especially for people looking for more keychains to sell at their markets. That's me personally. Keychains do so well at my market, so yeah, I was very happy to find a cute little carrot to add to my collection of keychain patterns. But yeah, anyway, I really liked this pattern and I would give it 4.5 stars out of 5. All right, and then next up we have another pattern by Crochet with Bae, and I promise that wasn't intentional. I was really just looking at thumbnails of like what the patterns looked like and not the name of the pattern designer or anything like that. I wasn't looking out for that, but this was one of the patterns that I saved in the food category of my saved section on Instagram. So it's the Avocado Pattern by Crochet with Bae, and this one, just right off the bat, I just want to note that I didn't like it as much as the carrot pattern, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. But first off, I wanted to note that this is in Burr Yeah yarn with a 6mm hook. This one right here is Premier Parfait Chunky with a 5mm hook, and then this one is Big Twist Posh with a 4mm hook. It's kind of interesting how Big Twist in Posh and Baby Bear it's really flexible in terms of like just this hook size that you can do. I've noticed that with a 5mm hook, there is a tiny bit of gapping, especially if you're working with a amigurumi plushie that you have to like stuff more than others. But if you're working with a 4mm hook, you have like really beautiful stitch definition and there's no gapping at all, as well as just like it comes out a little bit smaller and cuter. So that is also always a nice plus to add. So this pattern was a little bit complicated for me, and it's just because of the way that it's assembled and different steps, which I just wasn't familiar with. It's not steps that I typically run into with an amigurumi plushie. This one was truly unique in the way that you assemble it. It's assembled in 2 panels, so you have the lighter color panel for the inside of the avocado and then the back panel for the outside of the avocado, and then you crochet them together, and then at some point you have to pause to finish crocheting to stuff it, add your eyes, all of that, and then you finish crocheting it closed, and then you have to make the avocado pit separately. So with that being said, let's get into my notes about the pattern. My first note is that I didn't see anywhere in the pattern where to place the eyes. There is an instruction to sew blush under the eyes, so I ended up roughly positioning the eyes on mine near the top of the avocado where it's like a little bit slimmer than the bottom is, because it is an asymmetrical shape here to get that avocado shape that you want. But as you can see with each of my little avocados here, the eye placement was very different on each of them, and that's just because I didn't know where it was supposed to be correctly placed. I think out of all of these two probably look the best, probably this one looking the best out of all of them. As you can see on these two, the eye placement on this one is probably too high, as well as they're too small, so I just picked the wrong size. That's not the pattern designer's fault, but the placement kind of is, just because I had no idea where it was supposed to go. And then this one, they're a little bit off center. So that just goes to show you that it was just really hard to figure out where the eyes should be placed on my own, especially not knowing when in the pattern would be best to place the eyes. I found after making this one, this was the last one that I made, I believe, I found it easiest to place the eyes before you start crocheting the two panels together. So when you just have the front piece ready to go, that's when I popped the eyes in on this one so that they just look like they're in the right place. Whereas these two, I placed the eyes when I was in the process of crocheting it closed, kind of in a panic because I was like, when are we putting the eyes in? I need to get them in now. Um, so yeah, third time was the charm for me for figuring out the eye placement, but that really shows you that it's really hard to figure out where you're supposed to place the eyes on this one. Next up, I wish the pit of the avocado was no-sew. It's not no-sew. You make it separately and then have to sew it on. But I feel like there is room where you could just like surface crochet onto the front panel after you've assembled it, or when you're still getting it ready to get assembled, and you could just like surface crochet the pit on there instead of having to do it separately. And I feel like that would leave you a little bit less time in the overall time that it takes you to make the avocado. Maybe if you're not familiar with like surface crocheting as much as other people, it would have been a little bit more time. But I feel like if, you know, like with the Mama Made Minis knotted loveys, you surface crochet the bodies onto the head for each one of those. And those are so popular that I feel like a lot of people should be familiar with that technique by now and should be able to figure out how to do that. And if not, you could probably just include an instruction in the pattern for a separate alternative way to do it, just like how it's done now of making it separately and then sewing it on later. So having multiple options there might have been helpful. I know it is a little bit tricky to surface crochet, especially if you're trying to get like a perfect circle shape, but I feel like a lot of people just get turned off by having to sew pieces on, and you know, it's just not very fun to have to sew pieces on, especially when you're as bad at it as I am. Like you can see here, this middle one in particular, the avocado pit is not on perfectly in the center, which drives me crazy. Um, and yeah, I just feel like sewing is a little bit more difficult, and just crocheting instead into the body might make it a little bit faster to make, and you know, a little bit easier as well. I also just want to note that it's missing work in progress photos. It would have been really nice to see the first few rounds of the front panel because it's an asymmetrical pattern. If you're familiar with making symmetrical patterns, which most patterns are symmetrical, it wouldn't like scare you or make you think you're doing something wrong, because it certainly made me think I was doing something wrong, especially since I just got off the back of making my sock monkey pattern, and that one is symmetrical in shape when you're doing the same kind of technique of chaining and then working around the chain. So anyway, the biggest knock on this pattern for me is just like it's hard to keep them consistent, like looking consistent when you finish them. I think it's mainly just because some of the instructions are missing, as well as just like having work in progress photos is missing. It may also just be user error. I always like to say that as well. But because of the inconsistency that I'm able to achieve with the pattern, I would probably not try to make this pattern again in the future unless there was somebody specifically commissioning me to make one of these guys. But overall, I don't think it's market prep friendly just because of the effort that goes into trying to figure out things. It adds a lot of time to making these, as well as just it's not a fun pattern to make because of all the issues that I had myself. So I would have to rate this pattern 3 out of 5 stars. Before we get much further into the video and we look at the final 5 patterns that I reviewed for this video, I did want to mention that my sock monkey pattern is out, guys. So you can pick it up from my Etsy if you want to try it out for yourself. I had 9 wonderful testers test it out for me and make sure that it was perfect and it was ready to go. And I also had some comments in previous videos about some people just kind of wishing that patterns had a less detailed version alongside the more detailed version, the version that has like all of the extra notes, all of the photos, and all of that. So because of that comment that I had and some people agreeing with the comment, I went ahead and I put out not only the fully detailed pattern with all of the instructions, all of the photos, all of the extra notes about what certain steps mean and what you're supposed to do with certain techniques and stuff like that to make sure it comes out correctly. There is also a printer friendly version that is not only black and white, super easy on your printer, but less pages significantly. The full version of the pattern is 17 pages long, whereas the printer friendly version is only 9 pages long. It has hardly any photos in it at all. I think the only photo that appears is the cover photo. There is like the materials section, abbreviation section, of course, condensed into one page. And the instructions itself for the pattern are 4 pages long. So really, if you are looking for a dumbed down version of the pattern, you don't need all the bells and whistles to get you through it because you know what you're doing. You're an advanced crocheter. That is available for you with my pattern, and you don't have to print out 17 pages. You can print out just 4 pages of the pattern, really. There are 2 separate PDFs in my pattern, the printer friendly and the full version, so both are available in the pattern. You get them together when you purchase the pattern. And the pattern is available on my Etsy if you're interested in picking it up. I am so excited to release this. The release has been so successful so far, and I appreciate everybody's support who has gone ahead and purchased the pattern from me and tried it out themselves. I've already had some reviews rolling in, which is really awesome. It's really encouraging, and I can't wait to make more patterns for you guys in the future and release more patterns as well. I'm hoping that this year I can release patterns either bi-monthly, so every 2 months, or monthly. Monthly might be a little bit ambitious for me. I am not 100% sure what I want to do next in terms of my patterns. I have a couple patterns that I've worked on but just like haven't finished, but I don't know if they are ready to be released or if they need to be reworked entirely. But anyway, the point of this little segment in the video is just to remind you that my pattern is out if you have been waiting for it. It's over on my Etsy and it's linked in the description if you want to head over there and get it for yourself. And yeah, I appreciate all of you supporting me through my Etsy page and buying my patterns when I release them. And with that being said, let's just get back into pattern number 6 of this video. The next pattern I reviewed for this video is Pablo the Pancake, and this is a collaboration pattern between Dee Dee's plushies and Crochet with Kelsey. And as you can see here, I made it in a bunch of different variations, and it's mostly just because I didn't have like the original pancake colors in every different yarn type that I had. So this one is made in Big Twist, and this one is made in Premier Parfait Chunky, and as well as I believe Yarn Art or Himalaya Dolphin Baby is the dark brown on here. And then this one is made in a combination of Bernat Blanket, Bernat Baby Blanket actually, as well as Baby Bee for the syrup and the butter on top. But we've got a couple different variations here. As you can see, this one's meant to be like more of like a cinnamon sugar with like strawberry syrup. This one is like a chocolate pancake with chocolate syrup. And then this one is your more typical just regular pancake with maple syrup on top. So we've got 3 different stacks of pancakes here in different flavors. This pattern is a little bit longer of a make. It took me an hour and 4 minutes to complete this one, and it's just mostly because it's not no-sew. You make the stack of pancakes in one piece, that's all one piece, and the little divided sections in the pancake, it's not as obvious on mine just because I think I stuffed it too firmly so you don't get like the bulges in between these slip stitches into the back loops. That's what they are. But other than that, the Syrup in the butter is crocheted separately. The syrup is sewn on separately. It's just a lot of sewing involved in this one, which accounts for all that extra time you have to take to make these little guys, but they are really cute. I really like the cute little pancakes with their drippy syrup. As for my notes, I almost wish that the step in round 4 of the syrup were written using an ABC kind of method instead of just like a bulleted list. Just because that way I think it would be a little bit easier to keep track of where I am in those steps of the pattern. Overall, it is a lot of assembly and sewing and all of that involved in this pattern, so it is like a bigger project for not as big of a result, really, I think. Like, I feel like these could be a lot more elaborate for the amount of time you've invested in them when you finish. So because of that, it's not something that I think is super market preppable. Maybe like make 1 or 2 of them to draw people into your booths if you think there's like a crowd for people liking cute little pancakes. But really, these aren't something that you need to crank a bunch out for. Like, I don't think they're going to be that popular. Maybe they will. Maybe there's a huge crowd of little kiddos out there that just like love them some pancakes, but in reality, I don't think that's actually going to happen. So like I said, it's not something I'm going to make a ton of and put a lot of eggs into that basket of prepping a bunch of these. It is a cute make. It's really unique to have like a stack of pancakes with like drippy little syrup all over it. So because of all of that, because of some of the steps just needing a little bit more clarity to make it easier, as well as it just being a really involved pattern, for me, I would have to rate this one 4 out of 5. I still think it's adorable, like seeing these sit in my bin of makes for this episode of the FPR series. It was just like really exciting to see because making this was not fun. I did not like making this, but seeing it, it's so cute. So that kind of adds to the draw factor of this pattern for me. It's really cute. I just don't really want to make a bunch of them. That's just kind of annoying to make these, in my opinion. So 4 stars out of 5 for me. The next pattern I reviewed for this video is actually a little bit of an oopsie for me because I saved it thinking it was a free pattern on Instagram, but it's not technically a free pattern on Instagram. It's a free pattern on Ko-fi. So you can go over to this creator's Ko-fi and get the pattern downloaded for free. It's like a PDF that you can download for free. And they also have one more pattern on their Ko-fi as well, which I snagged when I got this one. So this pattern is the mini belly lemon. So Belly Crochet does a bunch of different like chubby looking plushies that have like a big old belly, and they're really cute, and they all have like this kind of unique shape to them. So this is the biggest version that I made in Baby B, as well as this is Elise Velotuo in the green up here. I also made it in 2 more sizes. So we have the middle of the range size. This is not Premier Parfait Chunky. The green is up here, but the yellow is Woanger Chenille Velvet that I got off of Amazon. And then the smallest one that I have here is in Premier Retro Velvet, and yeah, Premier Retro Velvet. So we've got 3 lemons here. Main difference between these 3, other than the size here, is just the stuffing for me was a little inconsistent. I realized after I made this first one, the biggest one, that in the photos of the finished lemon, it's a lot thicker up here, and I think it's just because the pattern designer must stuff it a lot more up there. So this one in particular, you can see the difference up there of it not being as slim. In my opinion, this one kind of looked like a banana before I added the leaves. And I think it's just because of the stuffing there. So these 2, the smaller 2, I both added more stuffing at the top to get that looking a little bit more like a lemon instead of like a skinny little banana. Each of these lemons took me 48 minutes to make, so it is a little bit longer of a make, but it does make a really cute, really decent sized lemon here. As you can see, the biggest size is really giant, but even the smallest size is like very decent size. Like this is probably in like my $15 to $20 range plushies. That's the size that they typically are. I think that having a photo of the bobble arms placed correctly on the same page as the instruction about where you're placing the bobble arms and possibly having to move them due to your tension would be really helpful, especially if the pattern mentions that your tension might affect the placement of your bobbles. Really just having a photo of like the finished plushie with the correct placement of those bobble arms would be really helpful there. I also thought the technique surrounding the bobbles was a little strange as well. So the rounds that you make your bobbles, you chain after you make each bobble, which I thought was weird. But then in the next round, you skip the chain. So I'm not sure why we're chaining if we're just gonna skip the chain anyway. It's not like you're creating like a big gap after you make your bobbles. I've never noticed that in any other plushie that I've ever made, that there's gapping caused by the bobble stitches. Really, if anything, I feel like that chain might create a gap, and then nowhere else in the pattern are you coming back to do anything with that chain that you skip. So it's not like it's there with a purpose of like adding something that these little guys are gonna hold or anything like that. So I'm not sure why that chain is there in the instructions. Next up, I thought the instructions for the leaves was really confusing. I think at first I was misunderstanding because of the way that it's written. So for example, initially I was reading that the single crochet, half double crochet, and slip stitch was in the same stitch that you started on round 21 because of the way that it's written. I think really what you should be doing here is you slip stitch into the body either on round 20 or 21, and then after that you chain 4, single crochet into the second chain from the hook, and then instead of doing those 3 stitches that I mentioned earlier, the single crochet, half double crochet, and the slip stitch into the same stitch that you started on, but rather you work into the next 2 chains on that chain 4, and then you slip stitch into the body. It is a little bit confusing about how it's written, and I had to look at it multiple times and redo my work multiple times to really figure out what was happening there. And there are photos on that page, but they're not helpful at all in trying to figure out what you're doing there. They're finished photos of the leaves instead of progress photos where you're showing photos of each step in that process. Seeing that or seeing a diagram would have been extremely helpful in this circumstance. I was really confused and having to redo these leaves over and over again when I would do it the way that I initially thought it was supposed to be done. They looked really weird, and then when I finally was like, okay, something is going on here, something is wrong, I was able to figure out what it was actually supposed to be saying and really just like adding some parentheses around those stitches that need to be on the chain, or just adding on the chain after those and then say slip stitch into round 21. All of that would have been really helpful in just making it as clear as possible. Finally, I thought the page with the embroidery and assembly details was really helpful. There was a big photo of the finished plushie as well as like arrows and text with the arrows attached to them that explain where you're sewing things on, where you're adding blush, your eyes, your mouth, all of that. It was all included on that assembly page and it was beautifully done. I thought that was really awesome. Just I wish that there were in other areas of the pattern work in progress photos that actually showed the plushie as it was being made instead of after it's been done, so that you actually know what those steps look like. So yeah, because of that, I would have to rate this pattern 3.5 stars out of 5. That leaf instruction area is really problematic for me, and getting that right consistently could be really hard for some people, but I feel like after you figure it out the first time, you can get past it and note in the future like, hey, I'm supposed to do it this way, but it is really confusing the way that it's written. The next pattern that I reviewed for this video is the Kawaii Sushi by Island Time Crochet. This one is a really cute little shrimp on top of a bed of rice, as well as a big pile of wasabi on top. I've done it in several different colors here so that actually, I would like to admit something real quick. I never realized until I was working the pattern that the pink bit on top was supposed to be a prawn or a shrimp. I thought it was salmon because personally I love salmon on sushi. It's delicious. So when I got through the pattern and I realized there was a little tail, and also when you get to that page where you're making the tail, it outright tells you that you're making a prawn. I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. But it does kind of look like salmon. I guess you could leave the tail off if you really wanted to, and it could be a little salmon piece. I made these cute little guys in 3 different yarn types. So this one is 3 different yarns actually. So we've got Bernat Blanket in white. We've got Baby Bee, and that's in 2 different colors. And then the green is Elise Velatuo. And I made this one with a 6mm hook. The next one that I made was all in Premier Parfait Chunky. And then the final one that I made was in Premier Retro Velvet. So 3 different sizes again to give you an idea of how little or big it comes out to if it is keychainable and, you know, like what you could probably price it at with that size in mind. I want to point out that this pattern had lots of work in progress photos and notes. It was really easy to understand, which was really awesome. It's something that I really look for in a lot of patterns when I review them now, is just having work in progress photos, notes, extra details in case you're running into any confusion in the pattern. Next up, I wanted to point out that the prawn tail doesn't really need to be a separate part. I think that you could just chain off of the final bit of the prawn's body and do those steps as you would normally do if you're making it separately, and then just leave a long tail and you would sew the prawn's body closed as you would normally do, and then sew it onto the rice cake as you would normally do in the pattern as well. I will say that it was really hard to locate the flat side of this oval little rice cake down here. I feel like I was doing it really inconsistently. So I think a note in the pattern is kind of needed where you say like mark where your decreases start and begin on each side of the rice cake so that you know which side is the flat side. It was basically coming out as a circle at the end of the process. Like I was able to kind of like mush it into an oval to kind of force it to be on the right side. But I really think adding some stitch markers at the beginning of your decreases and end of your decreases would really make it clearer where the flat side where you would place your eyes and embroider your face details on would be on that part of the pattern. So overall, it's a really cute pattern. I think something like this is something that will be really popular at markets as well. I've had like kimbap and sushi, nigiri, those sort of things at my booths in the past, and they always get a lot of attention and a lot of people pick them up and interact with them and are excited to see sushi at my market. So yeah, I think these will do really well because of that. So I would rate this pattern 4 stars out of 5. The next pattern I reviewed for this video is the corn pattern by Becky's Plushies, and it's actually kind of funny because when I put out my baby corn pattern, or at least when I was like teasing it and putting out the tester call, this one came out like right around then. So I'd been waiting to make it just because it kind of felt like betraying my pattern to make this so early after it, but it was like everything that I wanted my pattern to be. I was really jealous because it's so cute. However, I was expecting it to be like a lot smaller. So it is encouraging now that I've made it to see how big of a size difference there is truly between my corn and this corn. This corn comes out so much bigger, whereas mine is like a tiny little market preppable little pattern that is like made to be sold at lower prices, where this one you would probably have to price much higher. So yeah, there's the main difference between my pattern and her pattern, just the size difference, as you can see here, because even the smallest one is like probably 3 times as big as the size that mine comes out to. So yeah, I have this here in 3 different yarn types, of course. So we've got Burr Yeah for this one. That's the biggest one, using a 6mm hook. The middle one is made with Premier Retro Velvet with a 4mm hook, so that's the smallest one. And then the last one here is made with Big Twist Posh with a 5mm hook. So we've got different size differences here. I also want to note that the pattern has an option to add little bobble arms on there. So I made bobble arms on the biggest one just to show you what that looks like as well. The bobble arms are done a little bit differently, which is a little weird to me. Instead of making them in the round, you finish your little corn guy, and then you come back and surface crochet onto them to create those bobble stitches, which I thought that was a little unique and different. I'm not sure why the pattern designer did it that way, but it's an interesting little touch there to have to do that differently. Overall, I thought this pattern was really cute. It took an hour and 13 minutes to make, so that really shows you how big of a difference this is compared to like my baby corn pattern. My baby corn pattern can be made up in probably under 30 minutes for most people. So there's the main difference there, size difference, time difference in terms of like how much you're investing to create these. Another main difference between mine and this pattern designer's is that the corn cob is fully removable from the husk. So let me set these down quickly and show you how that works. All right, so here we are is our corn husk, and this little guy is just like a cute little corn cob that you can pull out. The husk itself is just like a sheath. It's not stuffed at all, and it's completely no-sew as well. So these little husk parts, the leaves of the husk, they're crocheted into the main sheath, I'm going to call it. And then when you finish here, you just tuck this corn cob in here into the husk itself, and there you are. You've got yourself a cute little corn cob, and I like how customizable the little leaves of the husk are as well. You can have them up, you can have them like kind of like folded down a little, or you can fold them down entirely so that you get a good view of your cute little corn's face. And you can also like twist your husk around if you want the leaves to be like front and back. All sorts of options here. It's really nice, and I can see people really liking it, especially kiddos who like to like take things out of things and put them back in, all that sort of thing. It's really interactable. Like you can interact with this cute little corn a lot. Look at that. It's just like a corn without a face now. Cute little corn. And then you could pull the face out, and it's like a peekaboo game. Lots of cute little options with this one. It's really unique and adorable. I really like this pattern, and I would rate it 5 stars out of 5. It's really great. I loved it. The last pattern I reviewed for this video is a little bit questionable in terms of like how kid-friendly it could be, but in my opinion, you could make this kid-friendly just by calling it something else and choosing different colors, more kid-friendly colors. So don't get freaked out about that. It's not as bad as you think it is. It is a beer mug. So obviously we can do it in traditional like beer looking colors, but you can also make it like a root beer mug. So we've got a dark brown here with like a foamy top, and then this one, it's like a pink soda. So you can pick any colors that you really want, and it can just be like a foamy soda instead of like a foamy beer. So super, super cute pattern, and I love how it came out. There is a no sew and sew version of this pattern, and the main difference there is just the way that you put the little mug's handle on there. Is there's a version where you do a no sew, and then there's a version where you sew it on. This pattern I made in 3 different colors, as I obviously already said. We've got Premier Parfait colors here, and then this one is Premier Gumdrop, and this little tiny one here is in Premier Retro Velvet, and as well as Bernat Velvet. I was actually really surprised at how quickly these guys work up. They work up under 30 minutes, so 23 minutes exactly for me. Because of the foamy top here, I thought it was going to be a lot more time than that, so I was pleasantly surprised when the workup time was less than an hour. I ran into my first note immediately, and that was just that the pattern doesn't tell you what color you're starting in. It doesn't say like foam color, it doesn't say main color, it just tells you to start, and it doesn't tell you what side of the mug you're starting on. So that was a big issue for me, especially when adding the foam later, but we'll get to that a little bit later. I just want to address that first. I got even more confused when I saw the foam instructions, which said that you're supposed to work into the front loop of round 12, but the part that I started in was the part that I made in foam because of where it said to color change. It said that you could color change, which was a little confusing to me, because on the front page of the pattern there is a version of this little mug here where the very bottom part is a different color and the handle is a different color. So that is different. and it doesn't tell you what color you're changing to, so I immediately assumed that you're starting in your foam color and your color changing to your main color there. Ultimately, it was fine because there was a back loop only round in round 4, so the same loops that you would have been working on in round 12 are still there. But I did run into an issue when I was doing that area of the pattern because you are missing the remaining back loops that you leave open after round 12 to create that spiral into. So I had to just crochet into stitches in a spiral just randomly to make sure that it was coming out correctly. I did notice the second time that I worked on this pattern that the color change to white happens after round 12. So I'm really sorry that I missed that. I was quickly looking over the pattern and trying to do this, so it's a good thing that I did it multiple times before I went ahead and rated the pattern just making it once. It's always great to just like double check your work and make sure you're not missing anything, and I did miss something there. So it was not an error in the pattern. It was just an error in my ways because I am impatient sometimes and I don't read all the instructions. So I'm sorry for that. There's not an error. I just didn't read everything. So anyway, continuing on with the rest of my notes. My last note about the pattern is about the handle and the fact that there's 2 versions of it. I will admit I only made no-sew handles because there's no way I would ever opt to make the handle that you're sewing on. Like, that doesn't make sense to me to test it if I am never going to do it, and I'm going to be critical of it if I did do it. So I'm glad that there was an option for no-sew. Very happy about that, but I do have some notes about the no-sew handle. My note is that I did have to leave a tail when I fastened off and kind of go back to the top part of the handle and secure it a little bit more, because when I finished it, it just looked like it was kind of dangling there, like it didn't quite look right. So the way, if you're confused about what I'm saying here, that you make this handle is you slip stitch onto the body from the bottom row down here, you chain 6 and slip stitch into the top part here, and then after that you don't like chain or anything, you just immediately start working back into that chain into the other side and then slip stitch into the handle where it started down there. So if you're thinking about that and just thinking about how you would do it in your head, can you picture what happened there that I had to like sew that part down? And just think about it for a second. So the issue there is that you're slip stitching down here twice. So this one is secured on both sides of that chain. But this one up here, you're only slip stitching once. So one side of this chain is secured up here. So it kind of like wants to turn like this, and it kind of looks a little bit wrong because the chain part, like the single chain before you're going back into the chain and single crocheting into it, the chain itself is secured, but the single crochet row of the chain just looks weird when you don't go back and sew it into the top here. It's a little tiny detail that I think most people wouldn't notice, but me, that was something that was really bothering me. So each time that I made this cute little beer mug here, I went ahead and I just sewed through that piece of the handle so that it wasn't like dangling there, and it was secured on both sides of the chain and that single crochet row. So yeah, there we are right there. It looks a lot better than it would have if I didn't secure the other side of the mug handle up there. So that being said, I really liked this pattern. Even though I had some issues at first that turned out to not be issues and just me being impatient, that tiny minor thing here, that's like the only thing I ran into in the pattern. It's a really cute, quick and easy pattern to make. Makes a cute little foamy mug here, and you can make both adult versions of this where it's a beer mug, or like a German Stein where you like make the handle and the first couple rows of the bottom can be gray and it looks like a big Stein. Or you could just like make kid friendly little sodas and root beers and stuff like that, and I'm sure both crowds of people would like it a lot. So with that being said, I would rate this pattern 4.5 stars out of 5. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed all the patterns that I picked for today's video, and for future videos, I hope that you have some suggestions for me for themes to go for. I know that when I did my review of 5-star 2024 patterns, some people did suggest a non-amigurumi pattern review video again. I've done one of those in the past. So I will be trying to prep for another one of those in the future. I think those will be probably a lot less preparation than these will be in the future, because I do plan every FPR video in the future to be laid out similarly, where I'm making 3 of each in 3 different yarn types so that you can really see the size differences. And that way you can also see like a bunch more plushies. I think that's always something that like gets people really excited, is seeing like lots of different versions of the plushies and all the possibilities that you can come up with when making these as well. That's all really exciting stuff that I think people will appreciate. And if you appreciate it, if you appreciate seeing the different sizes and different colors, different, yarn types, let me know in the comments section below so that I know that you like that and you want me to continue doing that. Because if you don't like that, I will not continue doing that. It is a lot more work, but I do think you guys will enjoy it. But if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments section. So with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit that like button, comment down below what you're working on, or if you're gonna work on one of these patterns in the future. If you've tried any of them, give me your thoughts on any of them that you have done before, so that I know what you feel about these patterns as well, if you've tried them. And anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful week and weekend, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!